Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning and welcome to Encounter. I'm Joe Sellepack, your host for the Encounter show today. Rod Serling was one of the greatest children of Binghamton. He grew up in Binghamton, he was from Binghamton, and actually Binghamton made it into some of his Twilight Zone episodes. And in honor of him, often we have on other broadcasts we talk about Rod Serling as far as the Twilight Zone and his social critique and all kinds of things that come up as a result of that. And we celebrate his life here in Binghamton quite frequently. And one of the congregations that celebrate him is the Unitarian Universalist congregation in Binghamton. Welcome to Encounter today, Doug. And it's great to have you, Douglas Taylor, and it's great to have you on. So what is it about Rod Serling and his connection to Unitarian Universalists that you celebrate?
Sure. Well, Rod Serling is well known for all of his movies and his shows, and we celebrate how he was able to tell a story,
right.
And how well he could use the medium. For Unitarian Universalists, we honor that he was a Unitarian Universalist, and we like to lift up the famous people, but also because of what it was that made him famous. It's something that we can continue to look at and say, well, how does that continue to inform us about society and about our own way of being religious people in the world. So he, in the same way that he wasn't born in Binghamton, he grew up in Binghamton. He wasn't born Unitarian Universalist. He became a Unitarian Universalist as an adult. Throughout his time when he was in Binghamton here, he never came to the Unitarian Universalist congregation. His family wasn't a part of us. They were actually connected to a Jewish community, and while they weren't devout or anything like that, they certainly identified as Jewish growing up.
Right.
So I'm not trying to say that
he wasn't Jewish, but
right. But they were more connected to that identity.
Right.
When he was growing up in his family.
And he married it was because he married a Protestant, right?
Yeah. So he had moved to Columbus, Ohio. Well, he moved to Ohio, Antioch College, I think, and he met Carol Kramer and fell in love with her. And part of what happened in their situation, which is something that happens to a lot of couples who come from different faith traditions, is that the families didn't approve of the match. And
right.
So actually her father was fairly anti-Semitic. And so that Jewish identity, even though he wasn't devoutly Jewish, he was, it's part of his identity.
He was Jewish enough then.
Yeah, he was Jewish enough, right? So her grandmother was going to a Unitarian congregation, a Unitarian church, and suggested that as an option. And so Rod and Carol, as they were having a family and they were looking for a religious home themselves, they drove like a considerable distance every Sunday morning to go to the Columbus, Ohio Unitarian Universalist Church. And he did that for a couple of years, became a member there, was part of the community. And when they moved to California, he went to the Berkeley Unitarian Universalist Church there and was a member there for some 30 years or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that in your congregation you have a lot of folks who have, I know of a few at least, but like Roz Antoon and
right.
and others where they had a Jewish who married a Protestant or a Unitarian, and they end up maybe having dual identities, right?
Yeah. That's a frequent thing that happens for Unitarian Universalist congregations. Is that we find couples who identify with more than one religious tradition, and the Unitarian Universalist congregation is a place where they can have all that they need to be able to continue to live their faith and grow.
So tell us a little bit about your congregation. Where are you located? And,
Sure.
And how can people get in touch with you?
So the Unitarian Universalist congregation here in Binghamton is on Riverside Drive. It's 183 Riverside Drive. It's got that arch architecture that's very distinctive. It's right next to Lourdes Hospital. You can find us on the web. We're at Binghamton.org. And then our phone number, you can call and pick up information from our phone answering machine or talk to our office manager. Our number is 607-729-1641. Or you can just stop in and visit. We have a lot of things happening throughout the week, but Sunday mornings our services are open to visitors. In fact, on May 14th, on that Sunday, we're having our service about Rod Serling.
That will be later today for those of you that are watching.
Right, so if you could pick up, this is an interesting show, maybe I'll swing by that church and see what's going on there. Interestingly, we our name is the Unitarian Universalist congregation, and partly that's out of a conversation with members of our congregation who have a Jewish identity, and it was odd for them to say to their family, I'm going to church. But to be able to say I belong to a congregation felt a little more comfortable, and that works for the people who identify with no religion as well, because we have quite a range of folks who attend our congregation and participate in the services.
So what is it that you're celebrating today then?
Right. So when I learned that Rod Serling had this strong Unitarian Universalist connection, and there wasn't another congregation doing anything with it, I thought, well, Binghamton's his hometown. Let's do something with it. And I looked to see if there was a day on which to do this. Right. So I meant to go look this back up, but right around Christmas, there's either the day of his birth or the day of his death, and I forget which it is, but.
That's one of the reasons that they do that marathon, right?
Right. And so there's a great marathon during that time. And so partly because that's a hard time for us to do something in church, and because there's already something.
Imagine at Christmas time.
Right. Let's talk about Rod Serling, our genius, and there's somebody else too, but whatever. No, it's there's already something going on at that time, and I found a reference to a Rod Serling Day. And I have no idea if it's an official thing or if it's, and if anybody's really using that. So I decided to use that. It's like mid-May. And, you try and figure out what's going to work in connection with like Mother's Day, for example. How many moms want to come to Sunday and hear about the Twilight Zone? I'll find out.
We could always talk about the Twilight Zone of motherhood.
Yeah, there's connections, where
he's got all kinds of connections.
Right, you think about your kids and you go do. Right. Well, but the real piece of what we're celebrating is not just that he's Rod Serling and that he made these interesting television series episodes. It's more the content of them. What's the message that he had? He was an amazing storyteller, and he used the medium to convey messages of social critique and public commentary to help move civilization forward almost. I mean, he had a really big vision of what his work was doing.
And there's always something of mystery and transcendence, and the issue of entering into the Twilight Zone isn't just, it's an we would talk about it as being an epistemological leap of faith.
Yeah.
You have to almost suspend belief at times in order to get into it. And in some ways, I mean, it mirrors what we have to do as people of faith anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, I like the way that he chose that phrase, Twilight Zone. He didn't say it's the dark night. He didn't call it, you're in the crypt now. I mean,
right.
there's shows that emulate what he did, and they're like the Crypt Hour, and I mean, we're not all the way in the dark and evil and the scary. It's the twilight. It's that in between where we already really are, and we're it's that transition into something that we don't quite understand. It's the mystery is almost just right around the corner, and so it's a real liminal space, right? Which is what you're talking about of the leap.
And it's really not. In a lot of his work wasn't as creepy. Many of them were creepy. Don't get me wrong. There were all kinds of them that were creepy, but some of them were almost calling us to a gentler time, to a kinder time, to a more caring time than what we experience here in this world.
Right. That sense of you ask anybody, did you watch the Twilight Zones? Or, what do you think of them? And you get that feeling of like, oh yeah, the do 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 do. There's something odd going on, and that was part of his genius. That was just the vehicle through which he would then talk about prejudice or how do we know truth? What's the evils of being a social conformist versus knowing your own truth and being able to name it. A lot of really power. I mean, he took on racism. He wasn't just being odd.
I think the word that you used that maybe even he used. He said that a writer is supposed to be a menace to the public conscience.
Yeah.
And in what way did he do that?
Well, he really took that seriously. He wanted to be able to get people thinking. There was an episode. This was before the Twilight Zone. He did a show that he wrote. Noon on Doomsday, I think it was called. This was before Twilight Zone, and he wanted to write a story about what happened with Emmett Till.
Right.
But he knew he couldn't actually do that because one of the censor's rules was, not to publish, not to put anything out that was controversial during, the certain hours in which his show would come out. And so he shifted the story a bit. He made the protagonist who was killed about an older Jewish man, thinking that might make it more palatable. His interest was in what was society's response to what happened. His interest was not in, let's talk about young black men being killed.
Right.
That was certainly something worth talking about, but his interest in that particular show, that movie he was making, was about how does society respond to that reality.
Right.
And so he could change it a little bit to make it a little more palatable. It still almost didn't get aired because of the censors at that time. And so one of the great lines that I love is that he shifted to science fiction and fantasy almost, not because he loved that genre, but because he said a Martian can say things that a Democrat or a Republican can't. It allowed him to be able to make this kind of commentary against society, to get people thinking. And the censors and the advertising executives would let it pass.
Right.
Because it was a Martian.
Right. Yeah, it's funny what a monster can get away with, right?
Right. And nowadays there's not a lot of censorship. No. That's the big thing. Free, I hear about and I fall into the category sometimes of the late night talk show comedians can say some of these things about what's going on in the political world. And people pick up on the fact that it's not just humor, it's also social commentary. So, there's a lot more freedom to be able to say things nowadays, and our society is at a point where we're hearing the nuances, or we're able to sift through what's a joke and what's actually a critique. But back at his day, he had to figure out other venues in which to say the truth that he was seeing and to raise these questions of privilege and bigotry and racism and personal integrity in the face of, for him at his time, it was McCarthyism. Yeah,
McCarthyism would have been imposing a certain type of censorship that he probably would find very constricting.
Yeah.
On that point.
Yes, very much so. And so he did what he could. And he wasn't the only one, but he was certainly somebody who is well remembered for not only being a good storyteller, but being able to be a public menace. He took that seriously, and he really tried to push the boundaries to get people thinking.
And instead of being an in-your-face kind of prophet, where he would just basically do maybe what Malcolm X or Martin Luther King or someone else would have done, he kind of went around it. He said, all right, here's what you look like in your world.
Right.
Let's go into the Twilight Zone, see what it looks like there.
Right.
And then he comes back into our world, pulling perhaps a little bit of the values from the Twilight Zone back into our world to kind of change it in that kind of a way.
Right. Right.
And in some ways, I think a good sermon does the same thing, doesn't it?
Right. It takes the reality that we're living in. It presents, here's the problem that we're looking at, and then it offers, and here's the gospel, and here's the message that our tradition offers, whether it's Christian or any other, and says, this is where we can look at a deep truth about living. And so I'm taking content like what Rod Serling was lifting up, not to say that he was a religious figure. He's a secular figure, but he's using the kinds of values that were deeply Jewish, deeply Christian, deeply Muslim. I mean, the religious values of personal integrity, of thinking through things, so that you can actually see listening to other people, so you can bridge the differences.
Right.
Walking in another person's shoes, loving your neighbor as yourself. Those basic pieces that a lot of religious people talk about.
Well, and it kind of reminds me of what you in one of your sermons a couple of years ago. You pointed to a graduation address that they had at Ithaca College in 1972, and you pulled out a quote from that.
Yeah.
And let me read the quote. And this I submit to you is the greatest thing you take away with you. It is the moment of thoughtful reflection that has to do with the person next door or down the street or across the tracks or on the other side of the earth. Everyone's death does diminish us, and it follows that everyone's poverty, everyone's indignity, everyone's frustration and hopelessness, they are part of us too. So along with your acquired knowledge, your sophistication and maturity, carry with you also the capacity to love.
Right. So here he is. He's giving the commencement address to this huge school. He was in Ithaca, so I don't remember exactly, but I think it might have been Cornell. And he was giving this commencement address to all of these incredibly intelligent people.
Right.
And saying, in essence, don't lose track of the real reason you have this gift that you have of your intelligence or of your training, that it's to build a better world. It's to break down those walls that we make by tribal identity. I'm part of this group of people who are better than those other people over there. He's trying to break